Happy New Year, and welcome to year 2 of the Adventuring for Mere Mortals podcast with your co-hosts, Kyle and Trevor. To kick off the new year, Trevor decided that we should probably find some legal counsel to advise us. So how about you introduce our guest?
Yeah, we'll do that. I could do that. So our guest this month is Daniel Out of Order Alvarez. He's one of the co-hosts, one of the other co-hosts of the Trail Show. So we had POD on 6-7 months ago. But yeah, he's a long distance kayaker. We're going to talk about that a lot, I have a feeling. Also a long distance hiker. He's done the Triple Crown in the US. He did the kind of insane north to south of Europe, like the most northern point nearest to the southern point, which is crazy. But yeah, I mean, yeah, you'll do a much better job of talking about yourself than I will. So yeah, Daniel, just give us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So my background definitely in adventuring. First, I am a mere mortal, so I fit in with the podcast. But my background really starts, in the long distance hiking world with, the classic Appalachian Trail as your first long distance trail, and then expanding out to the rest of the Triple Crown. Then doing a few smaller trails like the Hayduke and the Grand Enchantment Trail. And then I got tired of hiking, so I wanted a different challenge. So I got a kayak and paddled from the northern tip of Minnesota down to Key West. And then when I got to Key West, I thought this is one time in my life where I have a kayak and all the equipment I need to paddle across the country. So I should go back. So I went back, going kind of the other way. There's you can take the Mississippi down and then the Atlantic coast up. And then a whole lot of other rivers and lakes in between. But so that was a very long trip. It was about 503 days. And then after that, the last trip I've done is hike across Europe from the northern tip of Norway to the southern tip in Spain, which took just under a year. So yeah, and now I'm got a real job doing environmental law, so a little less adventurous, but still equally tedious and frustrating at times.
Yeah, I don't know if you're a mere mortal with that resume.
Yeah, that's impressive, dude, for sure.
You just take them one day at a time, and eventually you get wherever you're going.
Yeah. That's a good mentality to have for that thing. But before we really jump in, let's do a little bit of our catch up real quick. So Kyle, what have you been up to, man?
Started the new job, doing all the house things. Kind of crazy that you make a huge purchase based on, a very limited inspection and review of a place. and then you buy it. That. Yeah, and then you sit there and
totally feel that.
And you stare at a wall and you're like, what the hell is that? What did they do there? And then, I can't let it go. So I have to investigate.
This is why we're friends.
I feel it's
I've been
crazy,
doing that for
right?
months.
I spent more time thinking about a pair of shoes, and researching it than I did buying a house. Yeah, looking at the shoe. I'm going to take 3 looks at it. I only looked at this house 2 times. Yeah.
Exploring the state parks around here. So the one cool thing about the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is that a while back they made an initiative that they wanted a state park within 25 miles of every resident.
That's a really cool idea.
There's a lot of them.
Yeah, I like that.
What about you, Trev? Did you make it? I mean, obviously you made it through the holidays and everything.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't been doing much outdoorsy stuff at all. So I finally had to go offshore for my job, and I was out there for 2 weeks over Christmas and New Year's. So that's what every person wants to do. But yeah, out there for full 2 weeks out on the ship and getting used to ship life. The most annoying thing is I'm too tall to run in the gym. So they have treadmills in this gym, and the roof in the gym's probably like 7.5 feet or so, and it's one of those really thick treadmills, and I stand on the treadmill and I've got about 1.5 inches on top of my head. I'm like, okay, I guess I'm not running. So luckily they have some like spin bikes, so I just bike to get a little cardio. But yeah, just doing holiday stuff. So we ended up doing like Christmas with my wife and kids before we left, and then I just did with my family actually 2 days ago, last weekend.
Okay, so you did get to see your niece opening Christmas presents, because
I did.
She loved the wrapping paper, which was kind of amazing.
She's doing the same thing here. It was good. It's not ideal, but hey, it's a job. Pays me money. But what about you, Triple O? What have you been up to, man?
Oh man, just a lot of house stuff. I'm trying to build some furniture, and I'm not a woodworker at all, so I'm managing to create like mountains of sawdust and not much furniture to come out of it. Yeah. And then just a fair amount of just work. I'm doing a lot of interesting environmental law stuff, trying to stop climate change piece by piece. Actually, I would love to talk to you a little bit more about EVs, since I know what you didn't mention it in your update, but I know you're taking some pinup pictures of a certain EV recently.
Yeah, I've got my Rivian. I'm trying to limit how much I post about my Rivian on my personal Instagram page, because I know people will just get annoyed with it. But yeah, I love that truck. It's great. It's so much fun to drive, and and I thought it was going to be more of like a big adjustment to like switch over from like an ICE vehicle to an EV, but it actually wasn't that bad at all. It's just like a little bit of extra planning on long trips, and it's good to go. So much fun to drive.
Well, I mean, a lot of the work we do is about EV adoption and stuff, and so it's always good to hear people who have good experiences.
We just need a better charging network in the US, so you don't even have to think about it. So like, I drove to California and back, and I was like, okay, I can get to this charger. Then while I'm at that charger, I'm planning like, how much charge do I need to get to the next charger? But that's on the interstates. When you get off the interstates, it gets even harder. So like,
we got to do better for us. It's getting out into the wild and stuff.
Yeah,
it's like a big deal.
Agreed. But all right, this is an EV podcast, but I need to start another podcast about EVs. But yeah, maybe we should talk after this. Triple O, we should start an EV podcast.
Absolutely.
You heard it here.
Hey, it's all related. It's all related. You know, we have a lot of adventures are outside. I mean, EVs have great emissions. I mean, no emissions. So you know, it's an important aspect of adventuring, right? You got to protect these places that we love to be in, and you know, EV adoption is part of protecting them.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there. But okay, so I guess we'll get into our main topic, and I guess a good way to start that out is how did you start doing outdoorsy, adventure-y things? Like, where did you get your start?
Yeah, so I mean, I always blame my mom. Her dad was a forester in Colorado, I think, at some point in his life. He was also like a high school wrestling coach, but he always used to drag the family out. They were not that well off, so they used to go, you know, camping and traveling. So my mom always had like a big outdoors angle to her, and my mom used to drag me when I was a little kid into relatively insane hikes, like across the Grand Canyon. And I still remember like where I kind of like, at least my origin story in my mind starts, is that when my mom was like, let's cross the Grand Canyon. And of course I had never seen the Grand Canyon. I was like 10 years old. And we get to it and we look across and I'm like, there's no way. I'm like, are you insane? Like, the canyon is an insane looking place when you first see it. And so I refused to go, and my mom had been planning, because you gotta get permits for the Grand Canyon like months in advance, and my mom had been planning this, and we're from Florida, so it's not like in our backyard. We had to like go across the country, and she was like, well, if you don't want to do it, then you can just stay here. I'm gonna go alone. I'll leave you some money. You can just buy food and you can sleep in the car. I was like 10 years old. And then I got scared that she was really going to leave me. So I was like, okay, I'll go. And then we did, and it was great. And it was like really the first time you had that feeling that you get with long distance hiking, which is like, you look back and you see where you came from, and it's like feels so far away, and you're amazed that you're able to cross that kind of distance. And so I think that's really where it started. And just since then, it's just kind of gotten a little bigger every time. But I really blame my mom. My dad also took me out, but he was usually much more conservative about what he was going to do. A couple of years after that Grand Canyon, my mom actually couldn't get a permit, so she made us try and hike across in a single day. Oof. And she didn't even tell my dad. There's a telephone down at the bottom at this place called Phantom Ranch where the mules come in. And the first time we told my dad we were doing it was we called him from the telephone and was like, guess where we are? We're hiking across it in a day. My dad, probably his blood pressure went up a little bit, but we made it, so it was all good.
That's awesome. Yeah, in a day, that's rough. Like, what was that, Kyle? Like 3-4 years ago, we did the rim to rim to rim, and I think we did that in 3 days. And some of the crew that was with us thought I was being a little aggressive with my planning for the 3 days.
That was 3 years ago.
Was it 3?
Yeah.
And the canyon, I mean, those are not easy miles. You're going either
not at all
really hard down or up.
Yeah, you mentioned the I'll call it amazement of like looking how far you've come after you hike whatever distance. And I guess I just kind of had a realization because my wife's not big into hiking, and she's like, why do you enjoy it? And I think that's actually one of the things is like looking back and see how far you've came. Or if you hike to the top of a mountain, you're like, wow, can I see the car I came from? That type of stuff. And that's,
it's kind of amazing how far you can go and how short of a time you get far away. Like it looks like some of those mountain peaks look incredibly far away. You realize they're only a couple hours of hiking away.
Yeah, it's just one step at a time.
Yeah,
it's the steady thing. I think that happened with the group on the Foothills Trail.
Mm-hmm.
That we walked for 5 days and then had to drive. What was it? An hour and a half.
Maybe an hour and a half.
Back.
Yeah.
I mean, it puts it in perspective how quickly you can get around in a car.
Yeah, that's true too.
And how much you just blow past.
Mm-hmm. How much you miss. You don't see any details because everything's whizzing by at 70 miles an hour.
I used to tell this when on the kayak trip, I ended up giving a few talks. And I used to tell people like, one of the things I like is that slowness, right? That you see so much more of what you're traveling through when you're on foot or on a kayak. But like the lines on a highway, like this, the lane dividers where it's like a dashes, and you think like how long those lines are. You think they're like a foot long, but they're actually like 6 or 7 feet long. I forget how far. They're like significantly long, but you don't even realize it's just flying so fast down the road.
Yeah,
it's pretty incredible. But you do see so much more when you go slowly through a place.
Yeah. So that kayak trip, I'm interested. How did you conceive this idea? Was it just like?
Well, So, coming from like the long distance hiking world, I was like, well, what else can I do? And I thought maybe I can hike from the northern tip of the U.S. to the southern tip of the U.S. And then I started to look at it, and it seemed like there was way more interesting water than land in that region, like between Florida and Minnesota. So I was like, well, let me see if I can connect it, right? Because you gotta like a boat is not like a backpack. It's very difficult to get across land, so you can't like you have to minimize the gaps where you're not floating the boat and you're carrying it.
Yeah.
But it turns out, once you start doing research, at first, like, you get to the northernmost point, you're like, well, how can I get to the Mississippi River? Because I figured the Mississippi River was the easiest way to get south, right? Because you even have the current with you, which is sort of true. And it was what I thought, but it's sort of true in some places. And then you end up starting to find all these things like like all the fur trading routes through like the Boundary Waters, northern Minnesota area, which I think one of you has been to the Boundary Waters before, right? And it's
me.
yeah,
Yep.
it's a really cool and interesting
Oh, yeah.
area, like in all like the portage paths and like the routes, and the whole border up there is actually, it turns out is the path of least resistance, basically. And both the U.S. and at the time the British wanted to be able to use that route, so that's why they agreed that that's where the border would be. So the actual U.S.-Canada border through that area is the easiest path between Lake of the Woods, where the northernmost tip of Minnesota is, and Lake Superior, because those were it was like the highway of the fur trade. And so you're able to get
as long
to
as
Lake
the winds
Superior.
cooperate.
Yeah, no. That's one of the biggest differences between hiking and kayaking, is that sometimes the wind says no, and you just gotta be okay, I guess we're not going anywhere today.
Yep.
Yeah. So then you get to Lake Superior, and then you can get to the Mississippi River through another old fur trading route through there that's very unused at this point, but it exists. And then once you're on the Mississippi, it's pretty much a straight shot to the Gulf of Mexico. I mean, I didn't go all the way to the end of the Mississippi. I went over another portage through New Orleans to kind of cut off to head east, and then followed the coast. But yeah, that was where the concept came from. Just let me see what the northern tip of the U.S. is and the southern tip, and see if you can connect them.
Wow.
Yeah, and then the concept to go back actually started on the way down. Someone, while I was in the Boundary Waters or Lake Superior, they're like, well, are you going out like the St. Lawrence River and then going down the East Coast? I was like, wait, that's a possibility. You could do that. And then I started looking at the map. I was like, wow, you could do that. And so I didn't end up going back through the St. Lawrence. I went up through to New York, and then up the Hudson, and then over to Montreal. And then from Montreal, you basically just follow the whole fur trading route back. So through the Ottawa and Mattawa rivers, and then Lake Huron, Lake Superior. But yeah, it was a wild trip. I think it's really interesting when you go by water, because you end up seeing a lot more civilization, because our civilization is so based on water. And you can tell like how easy it is to travel on water versus land when there's no trails or anything. And you can see this is why we built the cities along all the rivers, and everything's there. A lot more history than mountaintops have.
So when you were thinking about this, did you have like previous kayaking experience at all?
I had very minimal kayaking experience. I had kayaked. Wow. I had taken a whitewater class for like a week, and then never really followed up on it much, because I was in Florida, so it was like there's not a lot of whitewater there. There's like a single rapid on one river, and then like barely a rapid on another river. So anyway, and then I had sea kayaked like little day things around Florida a little bit. Not in like the real sea kayaks, but like in sit on tops that you kind of paddle around. So no, I hadn't kayaked much, but I figured I would pick it up along the way, and I did. I was pretty good by the end. At the beginning,
you would have to be.
Didn't know what I was doing. Yeah. I figured that because I went, the first part you're on little lakes, so I felt like that would be a good place to learn. And then you get to Lake Superior, and at the time I didn't realize this, but Lake Superior is actually like super dangerous lake unless you really know what
I was gonna say,
because it's so cold, right? You got about maybe 5 to 10 minutes at most if you fall into the water, where you're still going to be able to function to try and get yourself back out. But luckily, I never flipped on the whole trip. The closest I came was in Tampa Bay, but the water wasn't that cold, so it wouldn't have been the end of the world. But it's a skill you pick up.
I guess that's another question. So that's a lot of different types of water, and I have very limited experience and expertise with kayaks. But aren't there like different types of kayaks for different types of water? Like I couldn't imagine going on a small kayak out in the ocean. That would sound terrifying.
There are definitely different. Like I did the whole trip in one, so it's a sea kayak. It's like I think it was about 17 feet.
Okay.
Because it was the most because I wanted the best boat for the most dangerous water, basically. Like
smart.
When you're in the ocean or Lake Superior, which might as well be an ocean, you want to be in the boat that can handle that water the best. And I didn't take it down any rapids, so it wasn't like I needed a whitewater boat that's very maneuverable, right? The short ones can turn really fast, but they don't go straight very easily. Whereas the long ones are good for going straight and long distances and like cutting through waves. And then like really in the boundary waters, as Kyle I'm sure understands, is like canoes are better because they're easier to portage. It's easier to unload your equipment, take it across, load it back up because you have the open top. But I managed with the kayak. It wasn't great in a few places, especially there's like the Grand Portage, which is the last portage in Lake Superior, is 6 miles long. So that one was a beast. It's 6 miles, but I can't carry everything in one trip. So it really I could get all my gear in one and then my kayak in one. So you end up going 3 times, right? Or 3 times the distance, because you have to take you take the boat, you go back for the gear, and then you take the gear. So it ended up being like 18 miles of walking to get the stuff down to the shore.
That's a whole day.
Oh yeah, it took a whole day. I camped, actually, I think I camped, if I remember right, I camped on the trail. All right, it took me like the end of a day and then a whole day the next day to get down. But yeah, there was some other great portages that were like kind of lost to time, because some of these routes are not really used anymore, but they were used. Like they were basically highways at one point in time. And I remember there was one that connects like Lake Superior to the Boundary Waters, but a different route that goes through Thunder Bay, which is just north of Grand Portage. They had to switch to that route once there was some dispute over who could use the Grand Portage, because the Grand Portage itself is technically in the U.S. Yeah. So they were like, "Oh, we're going to get taxed, so we got to go through Thunder Bay." And this route is like hardly ever used. The trail is not even there really. But like when I went that way, I was like, well, let me try this other way because it'd be interesting to see. And I was following like the directions, like it was go to this lake and then this lake and this lake, and you could follow it from like the old like diaries basically. And when I got to one of these lakes at one point, there was no trail or anything, but I knew they had to get to this other lake. And so I kept looking around, and eventually I found the like ground where it had been pressed. You could see like a slight indent, and there were trees growing up through it and everything, but you could see like way back through time enough people had walked through this, it was still visible. And I don't know, it's really neat to see that kind of history that was one of my favorite moments, is finding that old path and being like, oh, this is definitely the path. You can see it in the dirt.
That's like whenever I saw the Oregon Trail, the actual wagon tracks, and you don't think about it, and you're like, holy crap, that's the volume of people that went across it.
It's wild, right? Like this little like impression in the earth. Can you imagine like all the stories that came through, all like the people with their hopes and dreams, and like especially on the Oregon Trail, you got families moving out there, their whole everything they own. It's crazy to think about.
So where were you finding these? Like you mentioned diary entries for like these old fur trade paths.
That one, I don't remember where. I mean, I got a couple books about like the fur trade and the Boundary Waters, and I think it was just either in one of them or just like internet research, or just like how because they had like descriptions of where they went, what lakes to what lakes and stuff. But I don't remember exactly where I found that one. But like, there's some pretty good history books about that area, just because people really like. I mean, the Boundary Waters is a very popular canoe area, so and people just love it. So people like to dig into the history there.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's I don't know. I really found the kayaking trip had tons of history. I mean, you get that area has its own like fur trading history. Then you get the Mississippi River, and like you realize that the Mississippi to this day is still like a gigantic artery of commerce, because you got like these barges and stuff going up with like goods, and each barge, like these barges are pushed by tugboats, and they like strap them all together, and like one of these boats is as big as like a super Walmart, basically, moving up the river, like the square footage. It's kind of insane, and like it's just like the, and then it's going everywhere in the U.S. from there. It's just like you can see the artery of commerce, and you hit like New Orleans, and it's like a huge historical thing there. And you get to the Keys, and you find like, I mean, I remember passing like a boat that had come over, like it was abandoned, like makeshift boat from Cuba and refugees. Like it's just really cool. All the history mixed in with I find that the water really has that a lot to it.
Yeah, like I grew up, I think about 10 miles straight line from Mississippi River. You actually, I don't know if you're going to remember the town, but the town closest to me on the river is Chester, Illinois. You probably don't remember it. It's very small, but so I've been kind of close to the river. Like we lived up on the bluffs.
Does Chester have an ice cream place called Whitey's? Or is there another place in Illinois that has an ice cream place? I don't know. I feel like there was, it might not be in Illinois. But
if it was in Chester, it wouldn't have been close to the river. So like Chester's up on the bluffs. So it would have been a hike. I don't remember it, but that doesn't mean it wasn't there.
Well, Chester must have survived some flooding then if it's on the bluffs.
Yeah. So Moline. Oh, Kyle's looking it up.
Yep. I can't let something like that go.
I only have ice cream places. Like a good long distance hiker.
Oh, that's awesome. But yeah, you mentioned the flooding, and I recently learned about this. I think this summer from TikTok or something. I think somebody was doing the like source to sea route. So they were the source of the Mississippi down to the Gulf of Mexico. And he was talking about how roughly below St. Louis, all the cities aren't on the river anymore. And it's, and according to him, it was because at St. Louis, where you have the Missouri River meeting the Mississippi, like the volume of water goes up so much and you get so much more flooding that over time, all the cities that were close to the river just got destroyed. So they moved them away over time. And I was like, I had lived next to the river for like the first 18 years of my life. And I was like, I had no idea about this, but it makes like 100% sense.
That makes sense. Also above St. Louis, you have the lock and dam system too. So the flooding is a lot more controlled, even if obviously the Missouri River coming in does bring a lot more water too. So it's like more chaotic downstream anyway. But above St. Louis, the lock and dams at least have some flood prevention to them.
So you mentioned the lock and dams. How do you navigate those when you're on a kayak?
You literally, this is wild, but I had a little C radio, and you call them on their channel and you say, hey, can I lock down? And if there's no, like, you're like the last priority, but they'll fill a whole lock. They'll lock you down just like any other boat. It doesn't cost any money. It's just like whatever they do for any, like if a barge is coming, they'll do the barge first and you'll have to go second. But like usually if there was a barge or there was traffic, I would just portage around it because it was faster than waiting for them to lock down. But yeah, they'll lock you down. It's kind of a wild experience because you're in this gigantic pool that's made to hold a super Walmart of a barge. And you're just like floating around. Some of them are like nonchalant. They're just like, yeah, just float, do whatever. Some of them like, hey, hold on to this rope or whatever. But yeah, it's pretty neat.
That's wild.
Systems is really interesting.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
So I guess what was the wildest thing, like the craziest thing that happened on that trip? I'm just trying to I can't even wrap my head around all the stuff that could have happened.
It's a really hard. I mean, wild comes in a lot of flavors, like
it's not vanilla though.
Like I was randomly like I think like a great wild thing was that I was like randomly on like this radio program somewhere when I was in Minnesota, and this woman in Memphis heard it, and she's like, "Hey, you're gonna come down to Mississippi when you get here. Come stay with us." And like I ended up being there during Thanksgiving, and like I ended up having this Thanksgiving with this like wonderful family who had just heard me on the radio like 3 or 4 months earlier, and like her and her son and her husband and their 2 dogs, and it was just the cutest thing, and like we've kept in touch ever since then. Like I remember their kid was like 12 at the time. Now he's in college. He sent me a picture of him celebrating LSU's championship a few years ago.
Nice.
Like it was just wild, like these connections. That's like a great wild thing. I think the like I don't know, for probably the craziest thing that happened to me was at the very end on the way to Key West. When I got to Key West, like Key West claims to be the southernmost point, but it's actually not. If you look on a map there, the southernmost point in Key West isn't even the southernmost point in Key West.
Yeah.
The southernmost point is part of a military base, so they don't let you go there. And then B, there's another island off of Key West. It's like about 10 miles away, and then a little south. But it's a private island. It's privately owned. So like technically you're not supposed to go there. Like you can't set foot on the dry land. But I was like, I didn't kayak down here to not go to the southernmost point. So I didn't kayak like thousands of miles to end up 10 miles short. So I kayaked out to this island, and at the very southern end of it, there's a house. And technically the law, I looked this up because I'm a lawyer, I believe the law in Florida is that like up to the high water line is public property. So I was standing in the water, like about, in like a foot of water, because I was like, well, this is public property. I can stand here.
Yeah.
And I was like excited because I had finally made it down to the southern tip. And then this guy comes out into the porch. I feel like he either had like a robe that was open with just some like boxer shorts, or he had no shirt on. I forget, but the important thing is he had a shotgun. And he was like, "What the hell?" He was like, "What are you doing out here? Like, this is private property." Of course, we're in the middle of nowhere. And I was like, I was super excited. I was like, "I just kayaked here from Minnesota. Don't worry, I'm not coming online." He's like, "Whatever, dude. Just go away." So that was a pretty wild. I'm glad that he didn't shoot me, I guess. But
yeah,
it was pretty wild. Yeah.
And I'm sure he didn't want to be told the letter of the law. It's like, no, I'm not at the high water mark.
He was not interested in in my legal analysis of where his land ended.
Whenever you buy an island, I don't think you're a people person.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. It was too funny. Oh, here's another good one. Another wild one was when I went through New York. Like the harbor, New York Harbor is like insane with the tides, because you have tides coming in from like around Manhattan, and then the Hudson River is coming down. So like the currents are insane in that area, and they're like the timing of them is really weird. And it doesn't matter if you have a motor, but it matters a lot if you're paddling. And then the day I was there, it was also super windy, and there's like tons of boat traffic. You got like ferries coming by, Staten Island ferries like going around Manhattan. It's like insane amounts of traffic. And so like I felt like that was the closest I came to dying was in there, because the waves were so high that day that like I felt like I wasn't very visible. And then you have like these big ferry boats that are going through their channels. And so I kept like staying really close to shore to kind of avoid traffic. But eventually you have to cross like some channels that are open water. And I was like trying to cross to the tip of Manhattan, and like I'm paddling, but the wind is so fierce that I'm really not moving. Like a foot every stroke, like a very slow forward movement, because you got the current and the wind coming at you. And I'm like halfway across, and I look behind me, and like the Staten Island ferry's coming. I'm like, oh my God, I'm gonna die. Like, this is it. And then this police boat comes in and like escorts me. Like they don't say anything. They just like turn on their lights or whatever and just kind of wait near me until I get to the tip of the Manhattan Island, and just to make sure that like no one hit me. But then this gets better. Like I'm paddling, I'm like super excited. Like I'm in New York. I'm taking pictures from the water and like I waving to everybody who's like walking by, and I'm paddling up the Hudson River, and then if, like maybe an hour later, the same police boat comes by with their lights on, and they pull me over. I mean, as much as you can pull someone over in a kayak, but they pull me over, stop me, and they start interrogating me because they think that they said that they had some reports of someone taking a lot of pictures, and like it might be a terrorist, because this is like, because you're near like the 9/11 kind of area, like the the Twin Towers area and everything like that. And so they started like really asking me like, what are you doing? Why are you taking so many pictures? I'm like, I'm taking, what do you mean I'm taking pictures? I just kayaked here from Key West. Like, of course I'm going to take pictures. And I ended up showing, I like took out my camera. I showed them pictures like going all the way back to Key West. And eventually they were like, okay, I think you're not a terrorist. I think you're fine. They had to call in, like their supervisor came down and asked me questions. They asked me, like they kept asking me the same, different people would ask me the same questions. Like, where did you come from?
Wow.
How long ago?
Yeah, it was funny because I was staying that night with a friend of mine who works for the ACLU, and she was like, why'd you answer any questions? You shouldn't have let them. That was a ridiculous stop. They should never have gotten away. And I was like, well, I was, didn't want to have to call you and come get me out of jail.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty funny. But she made a good point. I think next time I would be less inclined to answer as many questions, just because I don't know. I feel like I'm at least you gotta draw limits in how much you're not gonna kind of stick up for your rights, and like especially as like a white man who like I'm not worried about the police actually like doing much to me in the end. I think it's important to like not just give into the idea of like, well, if I'm not doing anything, I'll just cooperate fully, even if it's an unreasonable search. I mean, they were like looking at my kayak and everything, but yeah. Anyway, that was a fun moment for sure.
Yeah, that's wild. Yeah, so I guess how you mentioned currents. How big you said they were really bad around New York. I don't think I've ever like paddled up a river. I've always paddled like down.
Yeah. Paddling up a river is tough. You got to stick kind of on the edges because the edge is where the current is the weakest. I avoided, as much upstream travel as possible, but the Hudson River was definitely one. The Hudson is really interesting because I think for the like 100 miles up it's still tidal dependent. So sometimes like every 6 hours it's flowing upstream, like basically. So if you time it right, you can continuously go with the current, even if you're going upstream. So I kind of did that when I was on the Hudson. I would like stop when it's going the wrong way and go when it's going the right way.
Smart.
Yeah. But yeah, no, it's brutal. Like when the current or the wind and the waves are against you, I mean, you can go backwards sometimes. It's like not even forget going forwards. You're actually going backwards, which is very tough. So sometimes you just have to call it a day and find a beach to stand on.
Yeah. No, that's cool. I'm trying to think of any other kayaking related questions. Do you have anything, Kyle? As always, I kind of take over the conversation.
No, you're good. I was looking at the outline and I was like, oh, are we going to get to the, northernmost point to southernmost point in Europe? But I think that's for another episode.
We can.
That's got to be a story in itself, seeing how the kayaking trip went.
I will say this about any hikers. Like one of the biggest difference I found with the kayaking is a couple of things from hiking is that when you have a kayak, people don't confuse you for like a homeless person on a trail or something like that. And like they're much more interactive. Like people are always asking me questions like, what do you do? Like, cause the kayak clearly like was like equipped for like something long distance.
Mm-hmm.
So you get like a lot more interaction with people, a lot more like friendliness. And
Mm-hmm.
that's not to say that my experience on long distance hiking trails, I've met tons of very friendly people, but for people who don't know about the trail, I think a lot of times you come off as like a homeless person or something. Then they don't want to interact with you. They don't want to talk to you. They don't want to really. They want to avoid you. But on the kayak, it was completely different in that regard. But at the same time, kayaks or like a boat also makes it very difficult to resupply and stuff like that, because
Oh yeah.
you can't like take a kayak into a grocery store like you can your
Oh, yeah.
backpack. So you basically have to find like a safe place to leave like all your world basically. And that was always probably the most stressful difference, which was like, all right, how do I get a resupply with this kayak?
Yeah, and
without
and
someone stealing it.
when you got far south, like there's nothing close to the river. Like when you get
Yeah.
down Mississippi, Louisiana,
Yeah.
like it's miles before you get to
Yeah, you
anything.
basically
It's like
have to like hide it somewhere and then walk into
yeah,
town and
yeah.
pray that it's there when you get back.
Oh man, yeah,
Yeah.
I'd be freaking out the whole time.
Yeah, I
away
stress
from it.
out just stashing my pack, to
Yeah.
go hit a toilet somewhere or something like that. Like what am I going to come back to?
Yeah.
Let
No,
alone
exactly.
everything for multiple hours that your trip is done if you don't come back and like boat's
Yeah.
gone.
And I
I
actually
guess I'm
met a
gonna
guy
walk
who
it.
was I met a guy who had lost his canoe. He was, I think, paddling from source to sea on the Mississippi, and someone had stolen his canoe. And that was
Oh,
it. His
man.
trip was over. I felt terrible for him. I mean, what a way to end a trip.
Yeah.
Luckily, that never happened, but it was always a concern.
Yeah, I guess that's another thing. So you're on the Mississippi or any larger river, you're kind of sharing the river with those super Walmart-sized barges.
Yeah.
How's that? How's that in a kayak that pales in comparison with size?
I mean, it's intimidating. You just got to assume that they don't know you're there. Even if they do know you're there, they can't really do anything about it. Like they have to stop like 20 minutes before they have to stop, right? Like, they have to think about stopping or turning or whatever, like way before they're going to be able to. So you pretty much have to make sure that you're not in their way ever, because there's nothing they can do. But luckily there's like a channel that those guys are in. So as long as you are outside that channel, you're good with, at least with them.
Okay.
And other motorboats are usually pretty much watching out. So they're not as, they can't run over things as liberally as a barge.
Yeah.
But yeah, those barges, you have to be careful, especially a couple of times I was paddling at night and you might have to cross the river. You got to really look and think, all right.
Yeah, to make sure you can,
especially at night, because the distances are a little bit difficult to judge sometimes with the lights. But yeah, they're big. I always felt like in the kayak, I always figured that like I always assumed no one saw me and assumed that everyone would just run me over. So if you take that assumption in, you just play it very cautious. So I was usually right near the shore, where it's they can't go that close to shore. So basically use that to protect you.
Okay.
And then in some areas you have to cross open water, but it's kind of like crossing a road. You just look both ways, wait for your turn, and go fast.
Yeah. As you said below, you're the lowest priority.
Yeah, you really are. You really are. Although they were, I mean, some like going through New Orleans, it's a much heavier activity area because they have sea ships coming in, and then the barges are there too. And like there was a few barge guys that were like working on a barge that I went past, and they like talked to me for a little bit, and then they called in because they didn't even ask me, but I heard them on the radio calling in and say, "Hey everybody, like look out for this guy in a kayak.
That's awesome.
Like watch out for him. He's coming this way. He'll be, this is where he's at. This is how fast he's moving." So like they also watch out for you. But like as I said, they can't turn or stop very
Yeah.
easily. It's like a train. It's even worse than a train. So even if they know you're there, you have the responsibility to get out of their way.
So on the more natural side of hazards, did you have to deal with any flooding or anything like that while you were in some of the bigger rivers?
There was some. I mean, not flooding isn't too bad of a problem when you're in a boat, as long as it's not making the rivers like too fast. The only time I remember it was when I was headed towards Montreal from New York. One of the rivers had flooded to the point where it was like really hard to find a place to camp. So I ended up having to string a hammock up in like a foot of water, just camping in the hammock between two trees, which is kind of a fun way to camp for one night. But it made me super paranoid about dropping it. Yeah, because you feel like you're going to drop something and it's gone forever. But yeah, other than that, it was pretty good. Yeah, no flooding. The Tampa Bay, where I almost flipped, was probably the worst waves. That in New York, one or the other. But the Tampa Bay one was funny because like Tampa Bay is like one of those open water stretches where you have to cross it. So there's nothing you can do about it unless you want to go way inland. I just didn't want to do that. So I get out into the bay and it's like very windy and the waves are getting bigger and bigger. And I'm like, man, this is tough. And then I look around and it's just like me and this gigantic freighter that's coming in from the ocean. And we're the only two boats out in the bay. And I was like, maybe I should have thought about this.
Yeah, maybe I should.
Like, there's a reason why the only other boat here is like a sea ship that goes around the world. But yeah, there was one wave that almost flipped me. Like I was halfway flipped and somehow I got myself righted. But that was the closest I came. And yeah, it was scary. When I got to land, I was just like, thank you. Thank you for getting me here. I was so grateful that my boat had managed it. I wasn't too worried about myself because the water was not that cold, but I don't know if I would have been able to hold on to the boat or what, or if I would have been able to get back in it because it was pretty rough seas. But would have been a different kind of adventure from there. Maybe walking to Key West from that point.
At least you would have been in Florida. It's
close to home, so not too bad.
Trying to think of anything else that like would freak me out doing this. So yeah, like I think it was probably like a year or two ago. I like put together a list of like I don't know, I would call it a bucket list or just like trails I want to do and things. And at the very end of the list, I like wrote down the source to sea kayaking route. Right after I was like, do I actually want to do this? Because like, I'm just kind of airing all of these like things that would freak me out about doing that thing. Because it's still on the list, but I'm still not convinced I want to do it, but you're helping. You're taking away some of my fears.
You know, the source to sea, the Mississippi is, I think, an interesting river, especially since you grew up near it. I think it would be an interesting thing to do. I will tell you, it's not like the prettiest part of the trail or the trip by any means. There is pretty in places, but like a lot of times you're just on a gigantic river that feels a little bit like a lake. But like I do think that there's some really neat long paddling trips, like the Boundary Waters. You could do the whole border route through the Boundary Waters. That would take you, I don't know how long that would take, but a week or two. It could easily be like a great route. I met a guy who had circumnavigated Lake Superior, and I went on probably like half of Lake Superior by the end of the trip, but that would be a gorgeous trip too.
Dangerous
stunning.
trip, but
dangerous. Although if you have like the right equipment, like which I did not have like a dry suit, but if you have a dry suit and you really know what you're doing, it's not like that dangerous.
Not to change gears too much, but to get back into kind of why we started this podcast. And one thing that's unique to you is that your father immigrated from Cuba, and be interesting to hear how that has, or if it has affected, your outdoor experiences in any way.
Yeah, it's interesting because my dad is like the only person in his family all my Cuban relatives that I know of that goes outdoors. Like the rest of them are very much not outdoorsy people. I don't think any of them have ever camped before in their lives. I think that's a true statement.
Wow.
Yeah, I would guess. So
your dad's
my
like the
dad,
black sheep.
yeah, he really is, and I'm not exactly sure why he became that way. I know he always loved his like uncle in Cuba had like a farm of some sort that he used to love to like be like with the animals and like play around in. So maybe that's part of it. But I do think that it's interesting because you don't like, sometimes there is something about that like a lot of Cubans do not ever go outside. They're very much into staying inside with AC, or at least the Cubans that came to the US that I know. But yeah, it's interesting. I think, the outdoors, and like, I mean, it's a podcast, so you're not seeing me, but I look like a white dude. So it's not like I feel like a minority when I'm outdoors. But I do think that it can be a tough place for minorities, just because, or as POD would say, minoritized people.
Exactly.
Sorry, but we all make mistakes. We just try and do a better job next time.
That's right.
But like, it can be very tough because you don't see people like you. You may not feel comfortable in those areas. I mean, I think about the Mississippi River in the South. Like I remember seeing the first rebel flag like in Missouri, I think. And it's like, you're gonna get like that. It disappoints me, but it threatens other people.
Yeah.
Like it's a reminder that your life is much less valued by a lot of people down there. Same on the Appalachian Trail, same on any trail in the U.S. I mean, let's not pretend like racism only exists in the South. So I think it is important. And I wish I had a better grasp of how, like, not just immigrants, but any minoritized people, like, how to make the outdoor spaces more welcoming and just available. I mean, I think, part of it is like solving racism itself, which is impossible to like wrap your mind around, because so much of it is derived from that, right? Like, the reason why some people are scared to go out into the woods is because they don't want to be alone with people who might hurt them. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, my dad also is very much looks like a white man, so I mean, he doesn't face that kind of scrutiny when he goes outside. But I think it's important to realize that, like, and I think some outdoor companies and stuff are doing a good job of that. Is like, everyone loves the outdoors. Like, it's not just white men like us. I mean, it's just not like, I was in Iran. Like, my wife's Iranian, and I visited her family for first time last summer, and we went hiking on this mountain. And like, Iranians love hiking. Like, they love the outdoors, and you don't think about that because, like, in the U.S. you think Iranians are a certain thing. Like, you just kind of box them in. And I'm not saying you guys. I'm just saying U.S. people in general.
The stereotypes that are shown
the
in
stereotype,
America.
right? But like, this mountain, we went to this mountain called Damavand, which is like a very famous mountain in Iran. It's like the biggest volcano in Asia. It's Iran's tallest mountain. It's like a sacred kind of mountain. It has a lot of mythical legends around it. And but like, it was so cool. I mean, you just like it's neat to be in a different place and see, like, okay, like, the outdoors that we see in the U.S., which is usually very much a stereotypical way, is completely upended in other places. And I think, I don't know, just I've been trying to think about that and like kind of how to, because I think a lot of it is like representation really does matter. Like, you have to see people who look like you to feel like you have a place, or you can be. I mean, and it's not to say there's not ever a first person. Like, of course you can do stuff that someone who looks like you hasn't done before. That happens all the time. But like, it takes a lot of effort to do that. It takes a lot of courage to do that. And that's like, we shouldn't be having to ask that of everybody. But anyway, that's a long story to say that, like, I don't personally feel that way. Like, I don't personally suffer from that barrier as much as most minoritized people. I barely am a minority, I think, other than my last name. I mean, I barely speak Spanish, so I don't count, I guess, in that sense. In terms of like facing that kind of difficulty when I go outside. But yeah, I mean, it's something I think we can all like work on, right? Like, make sure that we're welcoming to people, make sure that we invite our friends who don't necessarily look like us to do outdoorsy things, get them into it. It really just takes like a couple good experiences and people get into this kind of stuff. So yeah, sorry for that long ramble.
No. No, that was great. And you kind of hit on a lot of the things that they keep coming up over and over again as we do this. Like you mentioned that seeing someone that looks like you out there, like you're being represented when you're out there, that's a huge thing. And it just makes it so much easier. And that's come up multiple times. And
yeah, it does. I mean, it's clear.
Yeah.
Yeah. My wife is an academic, and like, it's the same thing there, right? Like, a student will look at their professors, and if all they see is a certain look, that's what a professor is. They don't ever think they can be a professor, but they can. Yeah. I mean, it's just a lot harder. It's harder to break through that barrier.
Yeah. Kyle and I know a lot about that. So we both went to grad school, and there's a certain type of person that is the vast majority of a lot of professors, at least in the U.S.
Trev, you want to bring this home?
Yeah, let's bring it home before I start another podcast, before I get all fired up. But, first of all, Daniel, Triple O, thanks for coming on. This has been a great conversation. And maybe I want to do more of a longer paddling trip now, for sure.
Yeah,
my is at least peaked, and some of my fears have been assuaded a little bit.
We can put the boundary waters on the annual
put
group
the
trip.
Boundary Waters on your list. They're a great first paddling trip.
It is on my list for sure. But okay, so we're gonna do my normal questions, and you might have already covered this because we've had a lot of scary experiences. But
sure.
What is your biggest outdoor mistake? It's my favorite question.
my biggest outdoor mistake is almost, I would say for sure. So after the Appalachian Trail, I'm like thinking I'm invincible because I just hiked the Appalachian Trail. I know everything about hiking. I know everything about the outdoors. And I decide I'm going to go hike the long trail during like a week-long break in law school. And it's like way too late in the season. And I get out there with my super ultra light equipment and immediately get snowed upon and get like snowed to the point where like I'm like freezing to death, and like the snow is building up. I'm losing sight of the trail. I like am like struggling, just trying to get to this nearest shelter. I really think I might die. Luckily I do get to the nearest shelter, and I'm able to like crawl into my sleeping bag and just start like heating water, boiling water, heating water, and drinking it, boiling water. And finally, like I feel like I'm like alive again. And I have to call my law school roommate and tell him to come back. He had just like driven like, I don't know, 3 or 4 hours to drop me off. Like, can you come back? Because tomorrow, as soon as the sun comes up, I'm getting out of here. It was very humbling, because you really do. You think you know everything coming off of like a big trail like the Appalachian Trail, and you actually know very little. And I think that's my biggest mistake, is kind of overestimating myself in terms of that. So I think it's always a good idea to be humble outdoors and realize that like things can go south very fast. and you always want to put as many mistakes away between you and death as possible. So make sure you keep it at least a couple mistakes, because on that one I felt like I was like 1 or 2 mistakes away from dying.
Well, at least you had the wherewithal to say, I screwed up, I got to get out of here.
That's true. Yeah. And that's a good point. Like, know when to walk away, right? No one
to pull pull the parachute and get out.
Yeah, you have to.
All right. Yeah. My other question, this is like, I use it as a catch-all, but like, is there a question that we should have asked you that we just missed it? Because
let me think. That's a good one. I saw this in the trail in the notes, and I was trying to think if there would be a good one. I will say this: the kayaking trip was interesting, and one of the ways I found it most interesting was it was the first long trip where I really got to see the effects of like environmental harms very close, right? Because if you think about mountaintops, everything flows down from the mountain. Nothing flows to the mountain. Versus like rivers and lakes, everything's flowing into them. So like all the sins of the world, right? Like all the pollution, all the like everything that's happening, the trash that gets thrown away, everything is flowing into the rivers. So like you end up seeing a lot more. Like you go on that trip, I went through like Cancer Alley, which is like the Mississippi River, basically north of New Orleans, right? Because there's so many plants and things there that like the rate of cancer in that area is like astronomical compared to the average in the U.S. I also saw like, some oil that was like chunks that were from the Deepwater Horizon spill in the Gulf when I was paddling, because it had been like a year, I think. But on that trip, I also ended up like talking to and working with some environmental organizations. And like one of the things that they told me that always stuck with me about it was, as I was paddling the Gulf Coast, it's gorgeous. Like the Gulf of Mexico is gorgeous. It's got these beautiful sand islands, like barrier islands. And you go through different states, and like Louisiana, then Mississippi, then Alabama. And as soon as you cross the border into Alabama, all of a sudden you see oil rigs like everywhere in the water, right? And then as soon as you leave Alabama, they're gone again. It's because like in Alabama, in the state waters of Alabama, they passed a law that said you can build oil rigs in our state waters, which is I think the first 6 to 10 miles of shore.
Something like that. Yeah,
something like that. And so you see, it's like a dramatic line, like no oil rigs, lots of oil rigs. And every beach in Alabama, you can't look out and see. I mean, you can see the ocean, but you also see a bunch of oil rigs. It's not like the most appetizing place to be. And I talked to this guy who worked for an organization that works along the Gulf Coast. I think it's Gulf Restoration Network. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting their name, but he was saying the thing is like environmental issues, like especially some of them, like environmental protection issues, the other side can continuously come at it. Like they've been trying to pass in Mississippi a law to allow them to put oil rigs in the state waters of Mississippi, like all the time. Like every couple of years they come back trying to make a legislative effort to do this, and they lose, and then they come back. And he said, but you can only, like, when you're trying to protect the environment, sometimes you only get to lose one time, right? Like Alabama lost that fight one time, and now they have oil rigs, and they're not going away, maybe ever. So it just drove home to me. That trip really drove home to me just how important it is to like fight for these places that we love, because there's not like a whole lot of them in the world. Like we got to really like protect the pieces that are still there. And so that was something that I really thought about a lot on that trip. I mean, you go from like Lake Superior, where it's the biggest, like one of the biggest freshwater lakes in the world, has like some astronomical percentage of the fresh water in the whole world, like for a single lake, where you can literally like take a cup, dip it in the water, and drink it, like no problem. Like that lake is as clean as can be in most places. There's a few places where it's a little iffy, but most places, you go from that, you go to Cancer Alley, you go to like the Hudson River, which is being like slowly restored, but like still it's like a lot of pollution. And it just shows you like there's certain places where we've managed to like make sure that we don't destroy the environment, and there's others where we've let it go, and you might never get those places back. Like I don't know if you're ever gonna get Cancer Alley to be like a place where the Mississippi is like swimmable or something.
Yeah. Or if you do, it's going to take a long time.
A very long time. Yeah. So yeah, protect the places you love.
No, that's great.
You might only get to lose once.
Yeah. That was a really good question we should have asked you about. So that was great. Thank you.
Yeah. Schooled again.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't mean to evangelize. I don't mean to like give speeches about this, but
no, it's like what important. You do. It's like what your job's about too. So that's good. So you obviously have passion.
It's more like an obligation, honestly. It feels like an obligation because I've gotten so much out of the outdoors. Like I've gotten so much enrichment, and my life has been improved like dramatically by the experiences I've had outside. And I feel an obligation to help protect it, at least in some way. I can't protect everything, but I can do like a little part. And honestly, it's just it's kind of like and it's kind of like a long trail, right? Like you can do your little part, like you can take your little steps every day, and then the next day someone else will do their little part, and you'll take, eventually you can get there. But yeah, all that said, like environmental protection also needs more than just like individual effort. It needs like systemic regulatory change, but that's a whole nother podcast.
Definitely. So yeah, once again, thanks for coming on. Do you have anything to plug?
I mean, I have an Instagram. You're welcome to follow it. Predictably Lost. I also have a website where if you want to read about this kayaking trip, I'm not going on any adventures recently, so it's pretty much dormant. But all the posts from that trip, I blogged a lot about that trip, a lot about Europe, north to south, predictablylost.com. So yeah, lots of stories on there. And if anyone ever has, questions or needs help getting outdoors or wants to know more about a specific area, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to talk to you and give you my thoughts about, hey, I want to kayak this, or I want to hike this that you've done. Anytime. Like so many people helped me get outside, answered my questions. I'm always going to be available to help other people.
Awesome. And of course, people can check out the trail show too.
Of course. Yeah. Oh, thanks. They're gonna harass me.
Don't worry, it's still gonna happen.
I'm already in trouble on that. You cannot listen to the trail show. We love everyone who doesn't listen to the trail show. So
that's right. That podcast that's had over 1 million views, but no one listens to it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, now for all my housekeeping stuff. The best way to show us some love is to rate us 5 stars on, Apple's the one that gets the most traction, but I think you can rate on Spotify now, maybe. I think that's a thing. But yeah, you can also follow the podcast on Instagram at Mere Mortal Pod. We have a Discord. If that's your thing, the link for that's in the show notes. You can follow me on Instagram at Trevor Bowman. See a couple pictures of my Rivian on there.
It'll make you excited.
Yeah, it makes you excited about some EVs.
Want to get some EVs.
Kyle still has no social media presence, so just wave at people that look like Kyle in Central PA. Oh, and I forgot. if you can also reach out to the podcast over email. We have one of those. It's at adventuringformeremortals@gmail.com. But yeah, that's all of my stuff. So I guess, yeah, until next month, Triple O, thanks for coming on again, and we'll see everybody next month. Talk to you all later.
Thanks for having me. It was a blast.